By the next morning, 3 local stations were looping a clip they got only after I called my attorney in the middle of the night, and she gave me a cautious green light to share it. Within 7 days, preliminary charges were filed: attempted poisoning, conspiracy, identity theft tied to a forged power of attorney. Big words, yes, but they fit what happened inside that room with the glass walls and the perfect flowers. I am Madison Cole, 32, Vice President of Marketing at a New York fintech. My total comp lands around $620,000 a year because I build campaigns that move numbers, not just feelings. That night at the Glass House in Chelsea was supposed to be a celebration for finishing my executive MBA at Columbia Business School. In our family milestones, double as stages. I thought I knew favoritism. I grew up as the responsible one next to a golden child sister. I didn't know how far they would take it until I watched the plan unfold in real time. What they did not know was that I was done asking to be believed. I had proof: paper trails, clean audio, crisp video, a chain of evidence my lawyer could defend. That calm you hear in my voice is not performance. It is what happens when you decide your story will be documented, not debated. If you have ever smiled through a family event while someone you love turned your life into a prop, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far the truth can travel. Here is how the night opened. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the Hudson throwing gold at the glass white linens hydrangeas that had to be pre-ordered, and a guest list that mixed extended family with donors, clients, and people who prefer handshakes to hugs. New York rules apply in rooms like this. Seating equals status. Intros are power moves. AV is choreography. The MC started with my sister Sloane. He praised her leadership, her philanthropy, her shine. My parents, Theodore and Vivian, rose to their feet like they were taking a bow at the end of a Broadway show. Then he turned. And here is their other daughter, fresh from completing her degree. No name, no rise, just a polite wave of applause that disappeared as fast as it appeared. I kept my smile. Dignity is not negotiable. Aunt Renee taught me that when I was a teenager paying my own application fees. As we lined up for photos, my mother leaned in so close I could count the crystals on her earring. Smile asset. Remember your tax write-off roll. I held the expression. If you know, you know. I clocked my friend Evan near a column camera at his side. He is a freelancer I trust because he never points his lens at pain without consent. One raised eyebrow from him asked, "You good?" One quick nod from me said, "Keep rolling." I took a slow walk to my seat and found my name card tucked beside the swinging kitchen doors, the only spot in the room where steam shouted orders and the scent of garlic butter arrive every 60 seconds like weather. That was the first hint for later. In rooms like this, where you sit is a sentence. The second hint lived on the head table. The new issue of a business magazine lay open to a feature they promised me 2 weeks earlier when the editor interviewed me about a campaign I had led. The spread showcased a $120 million media push we built to pull a flat growth curve into an upward line. The byline said Sloane. She was at the launch party. She was not in the war room. I did not confront the editor in the moment. I noted it. Misattributions can happen when a pushy PR packet feeds a busy newsroom the wrong credits. Corrections also happen. I knew how to make that work later cleanly. The third hint was hiding in plain sight. Guests kept telling me they were glad they arrived early. Early, they said, even though I had walked in at the exact start time printed on my invitation. Only later did I learn my start time was printed 30 minutes later than everyone else's. A late arrival on paper is an easy way to paint you as unreliable before the first toast. So the setup looked like this. I was introduced without a name. I was seated by the kitchen doors. My work appeared under my sister's name in a glossy magazine, and a handful of people thought I was late to my own celebration. On top of that, my mother's whisper called me an asset, a label that only makes sense if you have spent years being mined for money and credit. I kept my posture loose, my tone light, and my eyes open. Quiet does not mean unaware. Quiet means I am recording. One more detail to anchor us in the room. The AV team had HDMI live because they were running a slideshow later. That matters. In a few hours, it would let me show the truth without raising my voice. I promised a celebration, so I played my part. I laughed with colleagues about capstone projects and late-night study sessions. I let people congratulate me on Columbia like we were all reading the same script. When servers passed with the first course, I noticed Sloane drifting my way, wine glass in hand, that effortless charm she wears like a second skin. Enjoy it while it lasts, she said, voice glossy. This is your last time at the center of anything. Out loud, I smiled. I have always liked the view from the edge, I said. You can see the whole board. I do not trade in scenes. I trade in strategy. So while the string trio softened the room and the skyline did its best impression of a painting, I planted my feet where I had been placed beside those swinging doors and started counting the beats of a story they thought they were writing. They were not. They were walking right into mine. I didn't become calm overnight. That kind of composure is earned the hard way, one unpaid favor at a time. Growing up, my family used labels the way other people use nicknames. Sloan was the star. I was the steady one. She dazzled. I delivered. If a science fair project needed finishing at 2 in the morning, I finished it. If a grandparent needed rides to appointments, I built a spreadsheet and made it happen. Praise followed the performance, but it rarely landed on the person who did the work. That is how the golden child and the responsible child are born under the same roof and raised on different diets. One eats applause. The other eats expectations. Looking back now, I can see the first deals I made with myself. Be useful, and you get to belong. Carry the load, and you get to stay. That bargain held through high school and college. I paid for a lot of the early steps with scholarships, campus jobs, and a stack of grant letters I kept in a folder because Aunt Renee told me, keep proof of what you earned. When someone acts confused later, you will not be. Adulthood turned the volume up. After I moved to New York and started climbing, little asks arrived with handwritten bows. Can you spot us for this one-time bill? The card is maxed, but we will pay you back. Your sister has a big week coming up. Could you cover a few things so she can focus? It felt small at first. Then it became a system. About 2.5 years before that night at the Glass House, the one-time favors settled into a monthly rhythm. Roughly 40% of my take-home rolled out like clockwork, about $12,000 a month labeled as family help. The reason changed every few weeks. A contractor needed a deposit, a donor dinner needed to be prepaid, a sudden insurance issue. I paid, told myself I was lucky to be able to, and filed each transfer into a tidy folder that did not yet have a name. I did not call it what it was. Not yet. At some point in that stretch, I added a single authorized card to my American Express account for emergencies. You already know how this plays. Emergencies start looking a lot like retail therapy and restaurant week. Balances balloon slowly, then all at once. By the time I took a breath, the total had climbed to about $180,000. The explanation was always the same soothing hum. You are doing great, Madison. We invested in you for years. This is the circle closing. Looking back now, I hear the math better than I hear the music. 30 months of transfers near $12,000 a month puts you in the mid-300s. Add $180,000 in card charges. Then comes the part that still makes my hands go cold when I say it out loud. An Aston Martin DBX 707 sticker north of $310,000 registered in my name off a power of attorney I never signed. The car lived one town north. I did not. The first time I saw it was in a photo Aunt Renee texted me, a grainy Ring doorbell frame from a neighbor's camera showing the plate that matched my registration records. She did not add commentary. She did not need to. You can do the totals if you want. I did. The number lands around the high 800s, nudging 900,000 when you include the smaller monthly bleed subscriptions that quietly migrated to my cards. The family phone plan I absorbed because it seemed efficient flights and gifts that looked like generosity but were really a toll. I could afford it on paper. That is what made it dangerous. When you can afford the slow drain, people call it kindness. They do not notice the bruise. I wish I could say I pushed back right then. What I did was what a lot of us do. I rationalized. I told myself that my parents had paid for so much when I was younger. They had not in the way they remembered, but memory is a soft material. I told myself Sloan needed a leg up because her field was different, her timing was tough, and doors do not open the same way for everyone. Some of that was true. Most of it was convenient. Looking back now, I can point to the pivot. It was the day my company signed off on helping with tuition for my executive MBA at Columbia. My boss, Callie, who would become my anchor in this story, slid the paperwork across her desk and said, "We are proud to invest in you. Make sure you invest in yourself too." That sentence landed like a warning with a ribbon on it. Columbia is not cheap, even with employer support and savings. I budgeted carefully. I used a small loan for the remainder. So when my father later bragged to a table of donors that he had covered hundreds of thousands for my education, I did not just feel insulted. I felt erased. He was constructing a story where my success came pre-packaged with his sacrifice. He liked the version where I owed him interest. The entitlement was not always loud. Most days, it was a vibe. A friend of my mother would compliment a campaign I led, and my mother would tilt her head just so and say, "We are so proud of what our family's name opens for her." Our family's name did not open a single media buy. Our family's name did not hit a revenue target. Numbers moved because my team did the work. Still, I smiled. I let the moment pass. Pick your battles, people say. What they do not say is that avoidance is also a battle. It is just one you fight alone. The weight built in petty ways, too. Group chats where plans were made without me, then I was added at the end to handle logistics. Photo albums where I took the picture and mysteriously disappeared from the uploaded set. Family emails addressed to Team K with a postscript for me, asking if I could do the needful about a bill due on Friday. The language was the tell. Do the needful. That is not how you speak to a daughter. That is how you speak to an asset. I kept track without announcing that I was keeping track. Screenshots went into a folder. Transfers got tagged by purpose, even if the purpose line was a fairy tale. The American Express statements lived in a binder with sticky notes marking charges that magically aligned with Sloan's social calendar. The ring image with the Aston Martin plate sat beside my registration confirmation. I didn't know exactly when I would need the bundle. I knew I would. Looking back now, it is almost funny how obvious the role assignments were. My mother Vivian perfected the soft cut, smile while she trims you out of the frame. My father Theodore prefers the public narrative. If he says it into a microphone, it becomes history. Sloan lives on applause and assumes the lights are for her because for a long time they were. None of this made them monsters to me. It made them human beings with habits that hurt. The danger comes when habits meet opportunity and no one tells them no. Callie was the first person to tell me my boundary could be a complete sentence, not a speech, not an argument, a sentence. She watched me work, watched me shoulder what other people dropped, and asked a quiet question I couldn't dodge. What would change if you stopped letting them rent you by the month? That is the backstory you need to understand why I walked into the glass house at peace and left at war. Not loud war, documented war. I did not come to start a scene. I came to end a pattern, and as the trio tuned up for the slideshow and the skyline slid deeper into blue, I could feel that old bargain be useful, and you get to belong cracking like ice underfoot. Looking back now, that sound was not fear. It was the floor giving way to a better one. And the next breadcrumb, the one that turned suspicion into certainty, was already moving toward me down a narrow service hallway with voices I knew too well. Back in the room, the music softened and the windows turned the Hudson into liquid gold. I could feel my old bargain be useful, and you get to belong crumbling under my shoes. Good. I wanted solid ground, not stage lights. Breadcrumb 1 arrived on a breath. A server glided past with plates, and in that tiny pause, after she said, "Excuse me?" I caught the MC workshopping his next line with the event coordinator by the wings. Valerie Stroud. Chic headset, clipboard like a shield. She whispered, "The toast is after dessert." His reply was just a nod, but he glanced straight at my table. Not the head table, my table by the kitchen doors. That look told me I was not just badly seated, I was being staged. Breadcrumb 2 popped on my phone. A cousin texted a photo of her invitation, all gold script and heavy stock. Start time 6 o'clock. Mine, sitting in my clutch, said 6:30. The difference is not a typo. It is a narrative. Laid on paper equals unreliable in person. I saved the photo, then the thread, then took a screenshot of my own invite, because documentation is a habit now, not a hobby. I drifted toward the head table under the pretense of greeting the editor from the magazine. He had been kind on the phone 2 weeks earlier, curious about our media strategy and how we measured lift on a $120 million budget. Tonight he looked genuinely pleased to see me. Then he tapped the open spread and said, "Your sister's work is impressive." I let the quiet stretch. Presentation has always been her strong suit, I said, friendly and flat. Then I asked a careful question. Did your team receive a PR packet with credits pre-filled? He blinked. We did. Came from a family office address. I thanked him for the feature, congratulated him on the issue, and stepped away. Misattribution through an aggressive PR push is fixable. I didn't need outrage. I needed process. Breadcrumb 3 came, gift wrapped in cruelty. My mother was telling a table of donors a charming story about how hard it was to keep me focused back in school. She almost got expelled her second year. She said light as frosting. Skipped mandatory seminars, bless her heart. Heads turned toward me, curiosity warmed by champagne. I kept my tone even. I was in an approved exchange program in Europe sponsored by my department, and then I smiled. I hear the untrue version plays better over dessert. A few people actually laughed. A few looked away. That is the split you see when a room realizes it has been clapping for a script, not a life. Aunt Renee did not approach me with a speech. She moved like a person who knew the fire exits and handed me a small sealed envelope as if she were passing a note in church. Not a word. Just a quiet later. I stepped out to the balcony, the air cool against my face, the river moving like a metronome. Inside the envelope, copies of my scholarship award letters, 1098T, forms from undergrad, and a single sticky note in her looping hand, for when they pushed too far. I breathed easier, not because the papers were new, because someone else remembered. I slipped back in as the slideshow began. Families love montages, ours loves edits, Christmas mornings, beach snapshots, charity galas, a greatest hits reel with one missing instrument, me. At my high school graduation, the frame held Sloan beaming with my diploma while the crop erased me at the edge of the group. A few guests glanced at me, then quickly back at the screen as if the picture might correct itself if they looked hard enough. It will not. Cropping is not an accident, it is a thesis. My father stood for his toast. He led with gratitude and pivoted into myth. We worked hard as a family to support our daughters, especially covering the hundreds of thousands for Madison's education. He was building the ledger out loud, their sacrifice, my debt. I let the words stack and felt zero obligation to catch them. The right audience would see the correction in time, and the correction would outlast the toast. Evan appeared at my shoulder, close enough that only I heard him. "You should know," he murmured, "I checked the metadata on your invite photo and your cousins. They were printed the same day from the same template. The time field is the only change." He lifted his camera just enough to show me a timestamp rolling at the bottom of the frame. "Recording now," he said, "no drama, just insurance." He flipped his phone to airplane mode so no incoming call would cut the file. That small click was a comfort I did not know I needed. Breadcrumb 4 slid into place near the service hallway. Valerie, our coordinator, was at the half-closed door with my parents. Voices carried in the way sound finds the smallest cracks. My father first. "Calm. Make sure she drinks it. No scene, no trouble. Then my mother, sugar over steel. It will be quick. She will just seem faint from champagne." Valerie's answer was brisk. "I will cue the toast." I didn't push the door. I didn't gasp. I didn't run. Evan lifted his phone slightly and captured clean audio with the camera still rolling the time code, a slow pulse at the bottom of his screen. I stepped back into the ballroom and found my chair beside the kitchen doors. Breath in, breath out. The next minutes would require stillness. I scanned the room with that weird dual vision you get when your heart is steady and your mind is sprinting. The band shifted to something bright to usher in dessert. The windows held the last of the blue. The AV tech checked the HDMI feed for the slideshow and left the input live, small things that would matter soon. Breadcrumb 5 was visual. My father walked past my table and paused as if to adjust my silverware, the exact kind of fussy gesture he uses when donors are watching. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the tiniest tilt of his fingers over the rim of my flute. Not a packet, not a dropper, a dusting. The fizz barely formed before it disappeared. I didn't touch the glass. I also did not flinch. Evan's lens caught the motion from across the room with the steadiness of someone who understands why a tripod exists. Right then, two truths lined up. First, I could stand up and stop everything. I could point at the glass and the man who raised me and say the words everyone would hear as a bomb. Second, they had written this night so carefully that an outburst would be used as proof I was unstable. I would not give them a genre they could spin. I would give them a record they could not. I borrowed the kind of smile you use when you ask a stranger for directions and crossed to the head table. Sloan was mid-story soaking in the orbit. I held up my flute light breezy. "I think you got my glass. Yours is probably warmer." She grinned and swapped without thinking. People nearby chuckled like they had witnessed harmless sister theater. My father's jaw tightened a fraction. My mother's eyes did a quick involuntary sweep of the room, calculating angles. Valerie checked her watch and lifted a hand to the MC. This is where suspicion became certainty and certainty became strategy. It happened quietly. Evan's camera kept rolling. The AV input stayed open. Aunt Renee stood near the side aisle with her envelope clutched to her chest like she was holding the last hymn. Callie, my boss, had just arrived from another event and took a place near the back, catching my eye with one small nod that said, "I am here." The coordinator tapped her cue. The MC lifted the mic. Dessert plates cleared like a tide. Champagne flutes shimmered across the room like identical promises. I sat down, placed my hands lightly on the linen, and let the plan click into place. I was not going to shout. I was going to show. And before the first glass touched any lips, I checked three things in order. Evan's phone was still rolling with a visible clock. The AV tech was at his station. My own voice was calm in my throat. The MC raised his glass. To Madison, he said, finally using my name. The room lifted crystal in expectation. I lifted mine too. Not to drink, to begin. The MC lifted his glass. Mine was already in my hand, cool stem against warm skin. I raised it not to drink, but to mark the start of something that would not need a shout to be heard. Surface first. The obvious betrayals were already on the table, neat as cutlery. My name trimmed out of the slideshow, my work credited to my sister in a glossy spread after an overeager family PR packet spoon-fed the newsroom the wrong byline. A late start time printed only on my invitation so strangers could call me unreliable with a smile. None of those required detective work. They required eyes. The room had eyes. Most of them chose not to use them. Then the deeper layer, the one you only catch if you have trained yourself to listen at the seams. The hallway conversation I had just heard through a half-closed door. My father's even tone, "Just make sure she drinks it." My mother's "Sugar, she will only seem faint." Valerie's professional cadence, "I will cue the toast." You cannot argue that kind of sentence away later. It is not a misunderstanding. It is a plan. Beneath both of those layers lived the pattern I should have named years ago. The slow, expensive training of a scapegoat. 2.5 years of monthly transfers, roughly $12,000 each, moving out of my account as if gravity favored their needs. An American Express balance swelling to about $180,000 because emergencies had a way of looking like dress rentals and tasting menus. A luxury SUV north of $310,000 anchored to my name with a forged power of attorney. Those numbers were not random bruises. They were fingerprints of a culture in my family where I was the responsible child and therefore infinitely rentable. The sensory part came in a rush like it always does before a big wave hits. Glass chimed around the room. The Hudson had turned that deep New York blue that looks painted on. Candlelight strobed in the mirrored columns, and the air smelled like peonies, seared fish, and the faint metallic note of new ice. The kitchen doors breathed heat at my back. Somewhere a chair leg scraped, and it sounded like a bow on a single cello string. My father passed behind me in that exact moment when attention drifts from chatter to ceremony. He touched the edge of my place setting like a doting host, fingers hovering a second too long above my flute. I watched without moving my head. The tiniest glitter fell. The faintest fizz blinked out like a secret. I kept the glass high and the muscles in my face loose. I walked 3 steps to the head table. Sloane was telling a story that required her hands and the attention of everyone within reach. I set my flute beside hers and let my voice carry just enough to sound like sister banter. "I think you grabbed mine. Yours is probably warmer." She laughed and traded without hesitation. It felt absurdly normal, like swapping lip gloss. That was the point. Normal is the camouflage of ugly plans. The MC spoke my name. The room repeated it. Flutes tipped. I tilted too, letting the rim kiss my lip and pause. Beside me, Evan held his camera the way a violinist holds a bow. The time code pulsed in soft red at the bottom of his screen. He had already flipped to airplane mode. He had already checked the audio levels. Chain of evidence is not just a phrase in a handbook. For us, it was a sequence of small, careful choices. He caught my eye. I nodded once. Without looking away, he tapped a second phone in his pocket to start a redundant audio recording. Belt and suspenders. Sloane sipped. The clock began not with a boom, but with a blink. Her laugh hung in the air a fraction too long and then clipped. She tried to stand a light push of palm against linen and her knees faltered. Someone reached for a water glass. A fork slid off a bread plate and spun across the marble like a coin, deciding how it would land. Concern performed itself in concentric circles. My father's hand appeared at her back. My mother's voice softened into professional worry. "Breathe, sweetheart. You just stood too fast." I stayed still. Not cold. Present. I could feel the room scanning for the proper response. Was this a fainting spell? A bad oyster? A moment we should politely ignore? Or was it something else? The answer was already in the frame. My father's hand, the dust over my glass, the swap, the sip, the time. Callie had slipped in near the back and was watching me, not the scene. She gave the smallest nod, the kind you give someone when you have seen them choose dignity over drama one too many times. It steadied me. When you are the responsible one, silence becomes armor. But armor can also be a trap. Tonight, it would become a tool. I leaned a half-inch toward Evan and spoke without moving my mouth. Back it up now. He had a routine for this. He mirrored the raw file from the camera to a solid-state drive in his pocket while it was still recording a live backup that protects against sudden failure. Then he slipped the drive into an inner jacket pocket and started a second camera on a wide shot of the room for context. He was not chasing virality. He was preserving reality. Aunt Renee was standing 2 aisles over, envelope against her chest, eyes moving from the head table to me and back like she was watching a metronome. She did not look frightened. She looked ready. That was all I needed. 3 layers now fused. The obvious steals and slights that primed the room to believe the worst of me. The overheard plan that named the method and the means. The long habit of financial extraction that proved motive even when no one said it out loud. Intent, means, opportunity. Lawyers like to line those up. So do I. Here's the part I want you to notice because it is where so many stories like mine get rewritten by someone else. I did not leap. I did not cry. I did not try to win the crowd with volume. I kept the promise I made to myself on the balcony when Aunt Renee's envelope sat in my hand like a key. I would not ask to be believed. I would make it impossible to deny. The room settled into that strange quiet you only hear in fancy places when something goes wrong. It is not silence. It is calculation. People decide which way to turn their chairs. They check who is watching them watch. They invent neutral expressions. The paramedics were already on their way. Someone had called when Sloan first swayed. Good. Let professionals handle the body. I would handle the narrative. I stood without scraping my chair and walked toward the AV booth tucked in the corner. The tech was a young guy whose name tag had flipped backward, cheeks pink, with the stress of running a slideshow for a family that liked spectacle. I leaned in and spoke quietly. I have a short clip that needs to go up now. The venue has HDMI active for your slideshow. It is clean, time-stamped, and relevant to guest safety. He looked from my face to the room, to the screen, then back to my face. His hands were steady. He nodded once. I slipped him a thumb drive while Evan moved to the side to set his wide shot onto a tripod, which he always keeps in his bag because luck is not a plan. Not yet, I told myself. One more check. I texted my attorney Nadine with a single line. Video shows adulteration of my glass, then swap, then sip. Timecode live. EMS on site. She responded in under a minute. Do not editorialize. Play the clip. Email original to the case address I texted earlier. Then get statements to the officers. That was the green light I needed. Before we pressed play, I took one last look at the room that had raised me and starved me and called it love. The skyline did not change. The candles did not change. The faces had started to. People were turning away from my parents without moving their feet, social distance in formal wear. Everything that mattered in this section of the story had clicked into place. The surface cruelty, the deeper conspiracy, the long pattern that made it all inevitable once I stopped pretending it was accidental. The senses were tuned, the evidence was safe, the chain was intact, the AV input was live. The tech's finger hovered above the keyboard. I walked back into the center aisle, lifted my chin just enough to feel my spine lengthen, and let my breath go. Awakening is not an explosion. It is a decision that does not need permission. Revelation is the moment you stop translating what happened into something palatable and start calling it by its name. I nodded to the booth. Time to show them what the room had already told me. The screen went black, then bloomed. No music, no narration, just the angle from Evan's camera timestamp glowing in the corner. My father's hand hovered over my flute as if adjusting a fork. The tiniest glitter fell. A blink of fizz. I crossed to the head table, smiled, and swapped glasses with Sloan. She lifted the flute and took a sip. The room did not scream. It recalibrated. Phones rose like a field of pale stars. Someone whispered, "That is exactly what we just saw." The AV tech kept the HDMI feed steady. He had muted the house playlist without being told. I felt my shoulders settle. When truth is visible, you do not need volume. I stepped one pace forward so everyone could see my face and said only this. Please remain seated. The video is the statement. Aunt Renee, quiet, deliberate, moved to the front with the envelope she had pressed into my hand earlier. She did not grandstand. She held up scholarship letters, 1098T forms, and the email from my department chair authorizing my study abroad term years ago. Her words were simple. These are copies. Originals are secured. I nodded. She stepped back. That is how you reveal. Calm, documented, clean. Paramedics reached Sloan and began their checks professional, unfazed. An officer spoke with the AV tech, then with me. I kept it procedural. Name, contact. I stated that the clip shown publicly was a compressed duplicate. The raw file remained with the creator, and we would email it directly to the case address the officer provided. Evan mirrored the camera's original file to a solid-state drive while recording continued on a backup body. Then, using his own hotspot, he sent the raw file and the wide shot to the police inbox we were given. He also emailed a matching hash and a short chain of custody note to my attorney Nadine. We were not chasing virality. We were preserving evidence. I texted Nadine 2 lines. Played clip per safety. EMS on scene. She replied within a minute. Good. Do not comment beyond what is on the screen. Send originals to the case email I just texted. We will talk in an hour. When the officer asked for a brief statement, I gave exactly what the video showed, no speculation. Then I stepped back and let first responders do their jobs. That was the public pivot. The private campaign began before midnight. I left the venue with Evan and Aunt Renee. In the back of the rideshare, Evan handed me the solid-state drive with the mirrored file and a printed checksum on a small label. We backed the same files to 2 separate cloud folders, one shared with Nadine and one locked behind my own credentials, belt and suspenders again. Then I called Nadine. She answered on the second ring voice. Calm as a metronome. Here is the plan, she said. Tonight you sleep. In the morning you do 4 things in this order. First, identity protection. Place fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. Freeze your credit. File an identity theft report through the federal portal so the police report has a matching ID number. Send me the confirmation. I said yes to each step. Before sunrise, I had fraud alerts at Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, a full freeze in place, and the federal identity theft ID sitting in my inbox. Second, the vehicle. At 9 a.m., call the lender on that Aston Martin and report the forged power of attorney. Give them your police case number and the identity theft ID. Ask for their fraud procedures in writing. No theatrics, she said, just the process. I did exactly that. The lender's fraud team opened a file, emailed me their forms, and told me they would issue a repossession order once their internal checks cleared. That took 2 business days. The tow happened in a Westchester parking garage outside an Equinox, and Evan photographed it from the sidewalk because he happened to be nearby. Not dramatic. Precise. Precision is better. Third, banks and payments. Contact your primary bank's fraud unit to flag recent transfers. Reversals on instant payment platforms are limited to very recent transactions, so dispute those immediately. Older items become bank claims. Provide documentation for everything. I spent the late morning with a dedicated fraud specialist. We reversed a handful of recent transfers, filed disputes on the rest, and created a neat packet of exhibits, screenshots, annotated statements, and emails that would go straight to the investigating detective. Fourth, communications. Let me handle law enforcement follow-up and the prosecutor's office, Nadine said. You handle your professional reputation. Send the business magazine's corrections editor a concise note with proof of authorship draft decks. Upload timestamps and the original interview email chain. Post a measured LinkedIn update focused on the correction, not the family. No names, no accusations, only facts and receipts. By breakfast, the magazine had posted a correction and an apology for the misattribution. They confirmed that their byline came from a third-party PR packet and that my documentation established authorship beyond doubt. That post lives on their site now. Corrections do not trend like scandal, but they endure. I drafted the LinkedIn note exactly the way Nadine suggested. Bullet points, screenshots of the internal file timestamps, a link to the correction, no mention of my parents or sister. The tone was dry on purpose. The point was to anchor the narrative in work, not in gossip. It spread anyway, but for the right reasons. Colleagues texted variations of the same sentence, proud of how you handled this. That matters more than likes. By early afternoon, I sat in Nadine's conference room with a binder I had built piece by piece over the past 2 years without fully admitting why. She flipped through the tabs, monthly transfers near 12,000 for roughly 30 months' notes on what each emergency was called. American Express statements totaling about 180,000 screenshots of the family phone plan, and streaming services that had drifted into my name and the ring still of the Aston Martin's plate. She added an index page and a short affidavit I signed, then put everything into an evidence envelope with a date and time across the seal. "This is how you move a story from emotion to consequence," she said. "You make it easy to prosecute and hard to spin." We mapped the legal lanes: attempted poisoning from the video and hallway, audio identity theft from the forged power of attorney, possible wire fraud on transfers made under false pretenses, and civil claims for conversion and unjust enrichment. Nadine's rule was simple: let the state carry the criminal pieces. Do not be vengeful, be thorough. Then the practical moves. I canceled the family phone plan with notice for end of cycle, shut down the family subscriptions froze, and then closed the American Express card after filing fraud claims, reset every password, and enabled new multi-factor authentication tied to a device only I control. No social blast. I gave the toast video to law enforcement first, then to my attorney. After Nadine confirmed our filings and the chain of evidence were in place, I sent a copy to a reporter with the magazine's correction and a no-interview statement. The story ran without my voice and without my sister's medical details, keeping the focus on actions and aligned with privacy law. Inside work, Callie routed all external chatter to legal and PR and made clear my record stands on its own. I also sent a one-page certified notice to my parents' counsel: all contact through Nadine. No use of my name, image, or achievements without consent. Violations trigger contract and tort remedies. Boring is powerful. Allies surfaced fast. The corrections editor replied at 7 a.m. A fraud specialist stayed through lunch to file disputes. The AV tech sent the HDMI log, and the detective requested the original hallway audio and had Evan seal the SD card. 2 days later, the lender executed the repossession. Evan photographed it and filed the images. By the end of the week, the prosecutor had the video, audio, my affidavit, and the bank packets, while I had credit freezes, active case numbers, and a permanent correction link. The power had already shifted, and I never raised my voice.